Hello and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering EDH deck tech idea. Today we are taking a look at a two-colored dungeon commander. Stay tuned as we talk about Hama Pashar, Ruin Seeker. But before we jump into today's video, I want to make a shout out for Mythatom. Check out their high quality Magic the Gathering and other fantasy products via the link in the notes below and use my discount code LATSEL for 10% off your order. Hama Pashar gives us a powerful static ability. All of our room abilities trigger twice. For those of you who aren't familiar with the dungeon mechanic, you got 4 different dungeons, and with Venture into the dungeon you have the ability to move into 3 of those 4 dungeons, and once you've entered them, you need to venture again to go deeper and deeper until you've finished it. The 4th dungeon, the Undercity, is only able to be entered with taking the initiative. There's a difference between venturing into the dungeon and taking the initiative. Many creatures have those mechanic on ETB, but also some have it on attack. Every time you enter a dungeon room, you get a triggered ability that gives you a little bit of advantage. Once you've finished a dungeon, it usually ends up with a really strong effect. With that, dungeons offer a lot of flexibility that you can use to your advantage. And with Hama Pashar on the battlefield, every room ability triggers an additional time. As I have said, most creatures have taken the initiative or venture into the dungeon on ETB. As we are in Azorius colors, this is a flicker deck. I will most likely make a bunch of references to my Kaika Zephyr Awakener deck, as it is also a powerful flicker deck that also features taking the initiative. Let's talk about a few staples that most likely every flicker deck out there is playing. Starting off with Ether Channeler. This 3-drop offers a bunch of flexible modes which you will probably all use, and I think in this deck returning a non-land permanent to a player's hand or drawing a card is the most common one to be used. Besa, the Bounding Spring, is a relatively recent addition since Bloomburrow, and due to the fact that Besa checks with all of your opponents, it is an extremely powerful 4-drop. I know it from my Kaika deck. In many cases when I check with my opponents, I end up getting multiple modes, which at some point surprises me. Furthermore, it is also a very important life gain mechanic. In my Kaika deck, I often end up struggling with my life total. Knowing that on every ETB on Besa I will most likely gain 4 life, it has often stabilized my life total when I needed it. Of course, everybody knows the famous Mildrifter line. Cast Mildrifter for its evoke cost, on ETB draw 2 cards, hold priority on the evoke trigger and then flicker it again. It will be a new instance that isn't evoked, so it will stay on the battlefield and you would also draw another 2 cards. Wall of Omens is probably one of the best 2-drops that you can play. It is a powerful defender with 4 toughness that also replaces itself. Later on it can be flickered over and over again, and since the early game of many Azorius flicker decks is all about surviving and gaining an advantage, this is the perfect defender that you can play. When it comes to early game interaction, Skyclave Apparition is also another staple. Always make sure to sequence your turns in a way that you always start with the lowest CMC cost of your opponents if you know that you have to handle several threats. Start off with the lowest CMC and then work your way towards the highest CMC that you can target with Skyclave Apparition, to make sure that not too many strong elemental tokens appear for your opponents. Last but not least, another card that is extremely powerful. Since Bloomburrow, we have Dowerport Mage. In my Kaika deck it provides a ton of card advantage, and the best case is Kaika can hardly protect herself. But Dowerport Mage allows me for 2 mana to return Kaika to my hand. Sure, I will have to replay her, but that for 4 mana and not for the text amount from the command zone. All of these facts that I have just listed sound like a deck tech video for my Kaika deck, but you can also reflect all of those things to Hama Pashar. One of the toughest things about this deck is the fact that many venture into the dungeon mechanics on creatures come with not that many strong creatures. They are often pretty pricey, and all they do is let you venture into the dungeon. You need to combine those creatures with powerful flicker mechanics to draw enough value to make the investment worthwhile. These are a few of the creatures that I think are still playable in this list. Starting off with Cloister Gargoyle. Once you have completed a dungeon, it will be able to also attack your opponents, and before that it is a useful blocker on the ground. Goliath Paladin lets you take the initiative. Furthermore, it's also a vigilant creature. I'm a big fan of the vigilant keyword, and it is also worth mentioning that aside from outvaluing your opponents and also venturing into a few dungeons that can drain your opponents, this deck wins by non-token beatdown, which makes the Paladin a great card for your offensive endgame. Nadar's Selfless Paladin is a great creature. On ETB and on attack you venture into the dungeon. It also has Vigilance, which makes convoke spells in this list really strong. Furthermore, once you have completed the dungeon, he will give another anthem to your whole board, which is really relevant in this deck. Planar Ally is a really hefty investment, and I was also struggling with this one to add it to my deck. But once I have realized for myself that this is a non-token beatdown deck, I had to add it because it is an evasive creature that on attack lets you venture into the dungeon, which also means it is no investment of a flicker mechanic needed to trigger the next room. Tomb of Horror Adventurers is one of your most expensive creatures in this deck, but this is worth playing. If you can sequence your turns right, you will gain a bunch of value from the additional spells that this creature provides. And now let's talk about a few flicker mechanics. Of course, we wanna flash in Felia, Exuberant Shepherd. I am always happy when I can flash this one in my Kaika Flicker deck. It is a powerful flicker engine, which can also handle tokens of your opponents permanently. In any other way, it can also remove a powerful blocker of your opponent, but in the early game you will most likely flicker one of your creatures or your non-land permanents to gain additional value. Of course, Displacer Kitten had to be added to this list. This is really a problematic card, and if you want to play more on a casual level, maybe replace this card with something else. It is really strong, and I can only recommend to play this one in a group where everybody agrees to play stronger decks. I also wanted to add Farsa Deep Dwelling to this list. It is my most preferred flicker engine, but especially in a deck that plays around a bunch of non-token permanents, you will gain a bunch of devotion. This is a powerful flicker engine that also serves as a blocker, and at some point can also join your non-token beatdown. Let's talk about a few instant spells. We play Laezel's Acrobatics. I'm a big fan of this one. Also in this deck there are a few cards that will create your tokens, but Laezel's Acrobatics only exiles your non-token creatures. If you roll high enough, you will also gain a bunch of additional value, since your creatures re-enter and then leave the battlefield again and return to the battlefield again in the next end step. This is great board wipe protection, which can put you so far ahead that you want to make sure that this one resolves with a bunch of creatures on the battlefield. Kinda a similar card is Semester's End. Why did I add Semester's End over Ghostway? Well, Ghostway forces you to exile all of your creatures. You cannot decide what you want to exile. I think it was worthwhile to invest one more mana to be able to choose which creatures I want to exile, since we want to leave our tokens on board and just flicker our non-token creatures. Furthermore, those creatures can also enter with an additional +1/+1 counter, which is relevant because, as I have already said a few times, we win by non-token beatdown. As I have just described, we also want to play Eerie Interlude. This is the most powerful 3 mana mass flicker spell because for 3 mana you can decide what you want to exile. You can leave your tokens on board and just exile your non-token creatures. Dungeon Delver is Hama Pashar on an enchantment. Maybe it might be relevant for some other decks of yours where you also feature the dungeon mechanic, but this is a great 2-drop. If this one sticks around, it will provide you so much additional value that the investment of just 2 mana will definitely have paid off pretty quickly. Due to the fact that we play a bunch of mass flicker effects, we also play Panharmonicon. With this one, we can get so far ahead so quickly that your opponents should definitely have this one on their radar, and in the best case, counter it or also handle it immediately. You won't find a Conjurer's Closet in my list, but for that, due to the fact that we are in white, we play Teleportation Circle. It is simply 1 mana cheaper, which made it fit better into my curve. We also gotta play Touch the Spirit Realm. I'm a big fan of channel mechanics. They are really hard to interact with, aside from stifling them. This one can also be used in an offensive way by hardcasting it as an enchantment and then removing something that you want to get rid of. Understellar Sweep is another card that I find interesting. Sure, it is really expensive, but this one enables the initiative, which in my opinion is one of the strongest dungeons out of all of the 4. The additional token creation can be handy, but you shouldn't focus this one too hard. Virtue of Knowledge is a really flexible spell. I like this one because of its adventure side, which you can use early on, and then save this card in exile and at some point commit it to the battlefield as an enchantment. And now let's talk about a few more cards that will definitely win you more games. Riptide Gearhike is an absolutely problematic card in Commander. Not in a way that it needs to be banned, but it must be answered by your opponents. Otherwise, you will time walk all of your opponents over and over again, get rid of all of their boards, and overwhelm them also with this powerful creature because it has double strike and prowess. White Plume Adventurer. This card needs to be talked about. I play this one in my Kaika deck. And one of the most powerful sequences is having this one on the battlefield and then being able to ephemerate it. This is a very common line that was played in Legacy. This card got banned in Legacy for a reason. In a 1v1 format, if you can rush through the initiative that fast as this card enables, it will be really hard for your opponent to catch up. Furthermore, I'm a big fan of its untap mechanic. Once you have completed a dungeon, it is basically a Seedborn Muse effect for all of your creatures. If you then play Convoke spells, you can surprise your opponents out of nowhere, even if you're completely tapped out. When it comes to White Plume Adventurer, we also play Seasoned Dungeoneer. This is another powerful non-token creature that enables the initiative, and on attack you also get a really helpful effect that can maybe gain you a land due to Explore, or also Anthem something up and get deeper through your deck. Imoen Mystic Trickster is a really helpful card. It can protect itself due to Ward, and once you have completed a dungeon, you will draw a bunch of cards from this card. And even before that, if you have the initiative, you will also draw a card. If you can sequence it right, this card can immediately replace itself. Midnight Pathlighter is one of my favorite cards in this deck. As I've said, we play non-token beatdown, and what makes this card so powerful is that we give a powerful evasion effect for our whole board. Sure, our opponents might have their commander on board, which is a legendary creature, but we want to commit this one to the battlefield either if we are already ahead or have such an established board that we can swing immediately and take somebody out who is in the lead. Furthermore, connecting with our creatures will let us get deeper through our dungeon rooms. And last but not least, I also had to add Archaeomancer. This card is able to recycle all of your instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard. Pretty often people don't expect a Azorius deck to recycle its graveyard, but Archaeomancer does exactly that. He basically gives you a second hand which you can access via this card by getting back what you exactly need. If you have an instant speed flicker effect, you can answer everything that happens on the board. I play two effects like these in my Kaika deck and they often provide so much value and are feared by my opponents. Sure, I could play even more of those, but I want to balance it nicely. In this list I have only added the Archaeomancer to highlight the dungeon mechanic and not looping my graveyard over and over again. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I will play in Hama Pashar, Ruin Seeker. Let me know which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next. Make sure to check out my full deck list in the notes below, and then I would say, see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.